At the close of autumn in 196, the war between the Shu Han Empire and the Kingdom of Wu began in earnest. Travelling up the Yangtze from Liujiang, Xiahou swept into Changsha Commandery to seize all the ships he could find. Changsha was Wu's western stronghold, from which renegade king Sun Ce could invade all manner of fragile imperial holdings if he wished. Securing any boats Wu might use to cross the Yangtze was the first crucial step to victory, and plugging up Changsha was the second. To begin with, Xiahou met no resistance. Such was the activity in the south. In the north, Liu Bei was heading east along the Yellow River, and found that enemies had already crossed down into the central plains near Luoyang. They were men from Zhengjiang's mountain kingdom, and while they did not last long against the imperial army, it brought Liu Bei no pleasure to see their banners fall. She was so dedicated to the Han, but at the first excuse she's rejected the emperor's will and carried on like a bandit, Liu Bei lamented. She was a fierce match for you, your majesty, Zhuge Liang said. You and her were like tigers locked in a cave. Seeing you go free, how can she be content to wait? It is not a matter beyond most, Liu Bei shot back. Had she not lied to me before, I would never have trusted her. There is no one in the land the emperor can trust without doubt, yet you must have them trust you. Their trust is collected like a tithe, but returned like a loan. How easily this tower of pebbles tumbles. Liu Bei dismissed Zhuge Liang from his chamber and bid he practice his fragrant rhetoric elsewhere. He did, visiting various well-known thinkers in the Luoyang area, and being cast out of their homes also, always with a smirk on his face. Such was the nature of a would-be recluse. That winter, the city of Shenyang received a visit from the very woman causing Liu Bei's consternation. Queen Zheng had seized the local commandery, and was now preparing siege equipment to storm the city. However, she was quick to pack up and depart when General Le Bu marched down from the mountains, making a timely return from the campaign against the Yellow Turbans. She fled into the countryside of Jing, where she was like a bee trapped between two hands. At Langye, Zhang Fei was done mopping up Yuan Shao's invasion force, and was now quick to return the sentiment. He took his troops into the Dong Hills, and found men assembled against him at the ironworks. He sent for some villagers to learn more, and an entire village was brought before him. None had dared refuse a summons from Zhang Fei, much less in his station as imperial brother. It was revealed that the troops in the ironworks were reserves waiting for Yuan Shao to arrive personally, and as such had no baggage and no leader. However, they begged that the ironworks be left alone. They claimed that after the Yellow Turbans took over the commandery, the ironworks were used to provide tools for the locals, and paying work also. Yuan Shao had arrived with an army and burnt the place down in an enraged stunt the previous year. Now the place had been re-established under Yuan family control, and while the locals could no longer rely on its products, the government workers who were sent there made up a lucrative market for food and wine. "You admit yourselves that those ironworks are owned by the rebel Yuan?" Zhang Fei snapped back at them. "How could I call myself a general of the empire if I let his cronies carry on there? Ridiculous! I would rather burn it to the ground than betray the empire. How dare you come here and ask this of me?" Zhang Fei ordered the entire delegation executed, but Zhu Shu hurriedly begged him to reconsider. He was eventually talked down to just imprisoning a few, and then he turned his attention to the enemy. He stomped his men up to the ironworks through driving snow. House Yuan banners rushed about here and there, and no one came out to meet them. Archers and crossbowmen moved in and shot towards the banners wherever they could be seen. There were cries and shouts coming from inside, fading in volume as the evening turned to night. The snowfall ceased and the clouds began to part, revealing a full moon. Its light had the snow-covered earth aglow, illuminating piles of bodies beneath those still standing banners. Delighted, Zhang Fei ordered men inside to investigate further. There they felt the ground shake. Suddenly, bands of armoured riders appeared from twisting streets and charged. It was a formidable attack, but Zhang Fei's troops were veterans and had been trained for months by Shu Shu. They closed ranks and hid behind their shields, creating boxes that the horses shied away from. The charge was thus halted, and then all at once spears and swords were raised against the riders. Pressing forwards, the Yuan cavalry were pulled from their horses or killed where they sat. After such a display, the rest of the Yuan army emerged from hiding places all around and surrendered. While it was only a minor victory, Zhang Fei had captured a position that Yuan Shao himself was said to be marching towards. Careful preparations for a decisive clash could now be made. With plans in action to secure the central plains in the north and south, it was a strike from within to which Liu Bei was now vulnerable. Zheng Jiang knew it well, and swept through Jing at a rapid pace, taking whatever supplies she needed from the helpless towns and villages. But then she came upon a fortified outpost in Nanyang Commandery, where some Liu troops had gathered under a local merchant. Zheng Jiang surrounded them before they knew it, and they were forced to fight their way out. Those with horses raced to break through, and caught some of the Queen's followers unawares. Yet the difference in numbers was too great. Whenever they smashed out of one melee, they were at once surrounded again and plunged back into the struggle. For the infantry left behind, victory was their only exit. They lined up and faced off against constant raids, ducking behind their shields to hide from the arrows that fell in the intermissions. Zheng Jiang had no stomach for a long standoff, and simply rode out into the Liu formation herself. With a huge battle axe, she cleaved her way in, and it was clear why the old Han administration in Bingzhou had ceded control to her personal enterprise. Alone, she faced down the Emperor's militia. "Fools, why are you fighting for him? Just give me your supplies and you can live. You are nothing," she shouted at them. "The Emperor will bring peace to heaven and earth," was one answer. "You do not understand the meaning of loyalty," was another. "Emperor Dongfeng cares for us all. Once this war is over, things will finally get better," a third voice insisted. "So, that's what you really want?" Zheng Jiang barked. Clearly it was not, but enough advocated for fighting that the rest dared not leave. "I am here because my people cannot bear the Empire's weight any longer. The Han was destined to end, but your lord carries it like a thief dragging a golden carriage. You bumpkins must enjoy living under a boot. And who am I to tell you to change your mind? If all you want to do is what the usurper Liu says, then you can die content right here." Zheng Jiang quit the fight, her taste for the battle spoiled by the shallow will of her opponents. Her soldiers moved in and gradually uprooted all the Liu supporters, but the fighting was nothing short of desperate. The Liu men repeated their cries that the Emperor would bring about an end to the suffering of the common people. It was a cry easily repurposed from the time of the Great Yellow Turban Rebellion. One of Queen Zhang's commanders was pierced through by a thrown spear, and in all 3/4 of her troops lay dead or wounded at the close of the day. In the face of such fanaticism, she saw there was nothing she could do to overturn Liu Bei's support. Furthermore, Liu Bu had tracked her down with an army at his back. Hopeless, Queen Zhang fled, but Liu Bu saw that very few of her followers escaped with her. Thus, by the base loyalty of the common people, Emperor Dongfeng's realm remained intact. Liu Bei could not have been more overjoyed at the news. Not only did this prove to him that the people had been cured of their ails, but it demonstrated how good, whatever that might be, was destined to triumph over bad. That Zheng Jiang had lived and been humbled provided opportunities also. With internal defense secured, now the projects on the northern and southern rivers could command full attention. In Changsha, Xiahou Dun achieved stunning success, although not by any particular merit. He had marched straight from the Yangtze down to the huge metropolis of Changsha City and found it undefended. This incredible stroke was on account of the Wu army in the region being on the offensive in the southwest. There they could claim all the victories they wanted over impoverished rural communities, loyal to the Han only because there was no thinkable alternative. Yet that would achieve nothing strategically. The capture of Changsha, on the other hand, gave Shahudun and his emperor control over the military and economic affairs of western Wu. While decisive battle would have to be sought, no longer did Wu have the leverage to break into Jing. Once the reports arrived, Liu Bei rushed to Zhuge Liang and bowed before him. "Your strategy has delivered us from the edge of destruction," Liu Bei said. "Your Majesty, it was nothing any student of military arts could not have produced." "If that were so, this realm would be ruled by scholars," Liu Bei remarked. Zhuge Liang could only deploy his usual wry smile in response. "You need fear not, Your Majesty," he said. "For in reality it is wild, fiery spirits that brought us here. I speak of Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Shahudun, Zhao Yun, and Le Bu. These 5 generals are like the 5 elements. Together they can encompass heaven and earth. Prime Minister, could it be that in these 5 paragons we have the ones we need to rule this empire without worry?" Liu Bei asked. "Your Majesty, you forget your place. To ask a warrior to rule is like asking a table to fly. This empire has always had 3 heads: the warriors, the scholars, and the nobles. Without warriors, nobles and scholars are only voices in the crowd. Without scholars, warriors and nobles defy heaven. Without nobles, warriors and scholars fragment the realm. Therefore, as a noble, maintaining the balance is as paramount as breathing." "But Master Sleeping Dragon, were not all those things in order when the empire fell?" Liu Bei said, thinking his point undoing of Zhuge Liang's argument. But strangely, Zhuge Liang laughed and clapped. "You are further along than most," he said. "Yes, they were in order, yet they fell away as if shaken through a net. Yes, the empire can have 5 tiger generals, 5 great schools, and a family with 5 good men. But what are all these without—" Zhuge Liang looked to Liu Bei. "Without virtue?" he ventured. "But what is the source of virtue?" "The source? You mean heaven?" "Far from it. Acts of virtue benefit heaven, not a mote." "But they benefit the people." "Yes, exactly!" Zhuge Liang clapped again. "They are the source of virtue, or Tao. The Tao forms nobles, nobles raise warriors, warriors reflect scholars, scholars comprehend the people, and the people create the Tao. This is the way of a perfect state. But in this troubled time, nobles raise nobles, warriors rely on scholars, scholars pity the people, and the people's Tao sails away like a cloud. This is the way of a state doomed to break apart." Liu Bei sat astounded at this analysis. Unable to grasp it, he merely asked, "Prime Minister, your wisdom is unrivaled and your vision of a perfect state ingenious. Please guide me towards an empire that can never fall." "I will, Your Majesty," Zhuge Liang nodded. The Prime Minister was fully satisfied with such progress, although he worried that the far harder part of his task was yet to come. Back in Dong, Zhang Fei had prepared an ambush for the approaching Yuan Shao. He insisted upon setting up the catapults on the road, but that would spoil the surprise, and so Shu Shu had covered his machinations in tree branches. Thus it appeared like the road forked around a copse of trees, but when Yuan Shao's marching column approached it, the facade of leaves was torn down by Zhang Fei himself. Booming with laughter, he shouted, "Now that you have all fallen for this children's game, you will get what you deserve!" The horns were sounded, and from the woods and snow beside the road, the rest of the Liu army sprang out. Yuan Shao was riding at the very front, but was dragged back by his bodyguards. Zhang Fei appeared to be riding straight for him, but then he rode right on to the column's center. He was trained on a banner that read General Wen Chou, Champion of Yan. Beneath it was this Wen Chou, Yuan Shao's top general. He was at that time already in battle with Huang Gai, but the latter gave his superior officer the honor and withdrew. Wen Chou was known for his immense strength, and wielded a bulky 2-handed mace, easily the size and weight of an ordinary man. But what could it do against the matching strength of Zhang Fei, or the superior reach of the serpent blade spear? The point drove through the front of Wen Chou's open-faced helmet, dashing Yuan Shao's hopes of rescue. The Yuan troops were trying to scatter from the road, but Zhang Fei's men were all about with traps and horses aplenty. It was a dire situation, and Yuan Shao's lead advisor Xu You knew it. He grabbed a horse and tried to make off on his own. However, his path was blocked by a man in light clothing, holding a bow in one hand and an arrow in the other. It was strategist Xu Shu.
"Brother, we share the same name, and we would have walked together in ancient times. For the sake of our bond, won't you let me pass?"
Xu You begged. Xu Shu lowered his weapon and was about to respond, but then there was a loud growl, followed quickly by Xu You's head thumping down into the snow.
"No point taking prisoners. Don't let anyone escape,"
Zhang Fei scolded Xu Shu, picking up the head with the point of his spear. Xu Shu agreed, and took additional troops to see about trapping Yuan Shao. Strangely, Yuan Shao was not trying to flee. His whole army was gone, and he alone remained on the road with his sword held high. Tears ran down his face as he cut this way and that, overcoming the soldiers who approached him. While this dejected struggle went on, he was surrounded by the shields and spears of the reforming Liu army. Now there was no way out. Still, he clacked his sword against the wall of shields around him, unable to accept his fate. Finally, a sweep of the serpent blade spear split a few fingers from his hand, and his weapon cracked into the muddy ice underfoot.
"You thought it would end any other way,"
Zhang Fei said.
"Traitors and rebels, all of you! You've no idea what my family has done for the House of Han!"
Yuan Shao bawled.
"You are nothing but degenerate dogs, making a mockery of those that feed you! I'll see you!"
His tirade ended when Zhang Fei grabbed him, threw him to the ground, then picked up the dropped sword. Unceremoniously, he slashed, taking several attempts to behead his target.
"The traitor Yuan is dead! Long live Emperor Dongfang!"
he eventually declared, showing off the head for all of his cheering troops to see.
"Lord Zhang, should we not have sent him away to the Emperor first?"
Xu Shu asked, but Zhang Fei shot him a fiery look.
"My brother told me to exterminate those who hold power without virtue. If I spared his life, how many other self-centered idiots would try to rise up? Now go while I still feel like sparing you."
At this, Xu Shu scurried away. With Yuan Shao dead and his newest attempt to invade Shu Han completely foiled, the threat to Liu Bei's capital and most loyal commanderies was quashed. And indeed it all seemed to be a sign of heavenly favour, which only deepened those parasocial loyalties. 4 of Liu Bei's 5 great generals had now rendered monumental service in the War of the Three Kingdoms. Guan Yu had ensured victory over Ma Teng. Liu Bu had sent Zheng Jiang fleeing home alone. Xiahou Dun had seized any means of invasion Wu might use. And Zhang Fei had cut Yuan Shao's invading army apart from foot to head. Only Zhao Yun was yet to achieve an equally meritorious triumph. Keenly aware of this, he had taken his army to search out Liu Biao in Jiangshi. Doing so, he came upon the site of his previous campaign in the region. The village he had burned was crawling with soldiers, and upon further investigation, it was revealed that Liu Biao himself was leading efforts to rebuild what was lost. How would Zhao Yun deal with the rebels this time? Read on. Snow fell gently upon Liu Biao's village camp, tumbling straight down through the still air. Outside, Zhao Yun interpreted heaven's will.
"The winds have halted. The sky dares not draw breath in anticipation of this profound justice," he announced. "Liu Biao, a scion of the Han himself, shares no joy with his uncle and spares no platitude for soulless warlords. I will ride out and bring proper accord to the Empire with a single thrust of my spear."
With this, the attack began. Arrows were loosed into the village, where Liu Biao's soldiers were again among those struck down. Zhao Yun charged into a wall of troops, but by some mishap he was caught on a spear and dragged off his horse. The horse ran on, deep into Liu Biao's lines, not looking back. Enraged, Zhao Yun took up his spear and began to cut a path forwards on foot. Cheng Shu took it upon himself to bring the army along too. The defenders to the front were cut down in droves by tightly packed volleys of arrows, while the defenders to the rear were slain one by Zhao Yun.
"I purge you, rebel children," Zhao Yun called out. "The Han is like a man waking up after sickness. You are like the sweat that must be drawn out and cast aside. Heaven's sacrosanct value is fealty, and most abhorred value is arrogance. Knowing that, who here deserves live a moment longer?"
"You least of all," a voice responded. Approaching on foot, this man wore heavy armor and wielded a thin short sword. The wounded on the ground begged him to rescue them and spoke his name over and over, General Zhang Liao. "Were you not appointed by the courts to serve Gongsun Zan? Yes, they call him the King of Yan now. Yet here you are killing peasants in service to their supposed champion. Why not stick yourself on that spear and rid the land of the very tumor that caused its ills to begin with?" Not standing for such talk, Zhao Yun slashed and stabbed at Zhang Liao frantically. It was a fruitless effort. Zhang Liao turned the spearhead aside with his blade, leading it in a curling dance that easily matched Zhao Yun's aggressive pace. They fought for 50 bouts, by which time the rest of Zhao Yun's troops had arrived. Surrounded, Zhang Liao threw his sword to the ground and said, "Anyone can claim to be serving a higher purpose, and anything can be made virtuous by a poet. But how we tread over the land is all that matters. That is rendered virtuous without a word being spoken." Zhang Liao said and did no more, but in turn no one acted against him. With a jerk of his head, Zhao Yun ordered the valiant general be led back to camp. Then Zhao Yun ran up to the front of the advancing formation and saw an array of tents set up in the center of the village. There were troops all around them, and outside the entrance to the largest sat an old man in a golden robe and bejeweled headpiece. Of course, it was Liu Bei himself. Zhao Yun waved his men to attack and joined in personally. While the soldiers from both sides brawled, Zhao Yun heard his name being called. It was coming from the tents, and after barging through to investigate, he saw Liu Bei seated inside his tent. A tea set was laid out in front of him. A soldier invited Zhao Yun, and the general obliged. The tent flap was tied closed, but the noise of battle all around became no quieter. Liu Bei motioned for Zhao Yun to sit, and he did so. Two maids poured out the tea and helped clean off Zhao Yun's bloody attire. "General Zhao, I hope I am not disturbing you greatly," Liu Bei said. "That is yet to be seen. I'll accept no gifts less sincere than your surrender, Lord Liu," Zhao Yun replied. "It is hard to surrender with sincerity to one who offered no such privilege to my people, to this very village. Anyone can be loyal. If I need ask it of someone, that only proves they have already committed a crime. There were many so blindly loyal to the traitor Dong Zhuo. Were they not criminals? Dong Zhuo took his office by force. Liu Bei was begged to accept the responsibility on behalf of the emperor and the people. There is no comparison. But did Emperor Dongfeng not take Emperor Shan into his own court, where the young boy saw that the land was still ailed by starvation, disease, and government corruption, despite Liu Bei's clean-faced proclamations? There he saw that his realm was doomed and could not bear it. Only then, cowering in fear of the world Liu Bei is creating, did he try to escape it all and find some scrap of peace for himself. Were he older, perhaps it would be less egregious that Liu Bei dared exploit the Son of Heaven's misery. How can the Son of Heaven be forced into making a decision? He is the highest authority, the highest power. You disgrace him by claiming he was coerced, and reveal your own contempt for the one you claim to support." Zhao Yun laughed. Liu Bei sighed and shook his head. "You are too great a hero, General Zhao. You have forgotten what it is like to be weak. Emperor Shan chose to give up his throne only as much as my people chose to be born in my domain. What a curse greatness is, to take one so far from knowing what it means to be human. Now please, General, let this all end. I will go to the Emperor Dongfeng and settle this matter." Zhao Yun wasn't sure what Liu Biao was trying to say, but the allusion to surrendering was picked up at least. Liu Biao did surrender, although only to the court officials in Donghai, where he shared tears with Liu Shi in the newly fashioned imperial palace. Liu Bei was out of reach, having crossed the Yellow River to attack the city of Hedong. The area was under Zheng Jiang's control and offered access into her personal realm in the Bing Mountains. The city was put under siege for several weeks, during which time there was crucial action ongoing far away. After taking the head of Yuan Shao in Dong, Zhang Fei had been stalking the mountains in search of Yuan Shang, the late Yuan Patriarch's third son. This son had an army of his own and had attacked Pengcheng Commandery in search of revenge. While he took territory, he made no impact on the empire's military situation. After cooling off, he tried to march back home, but Zhang Fei fell upon him just as he had Yuan Shao.
Master Shu was right. This brat was so scared he really did try a night march,
Huang Gai commented as the Yuan column marched up the road. When the time was right, the Liu troops lit lamps and sprung on the column from all around, killing foes by the hundred. Huang Gai managed to get into the action first and had his chance at Yuan Shang. This time, Zhang Fei allowed his comrade some acclaim and watched Huang Gai sweep a huge great axe into Yuan Shang's stomach. The Yuan forces scattered, and the fighting was over in mere minutes. The Yuan clan's fortunes waned ever further, their dreams of pride of place beside Emperor Shan vanquished like a candle flame in a storm. As the sun rose over the bloody road, another encounter began in the south. Near the city of Changsha, Shahudun had been searching for the Wu army said to be based nearby. Incredibly, he had ended up camping on one side of a hill, while the Wu army was actually on the side opposite, but neither side came across the other. The Wu force, led by Sun Ce's stout mother, Lady Wu, marched off towards Changsha, surely destined to let Shahudun go searching through the countryside in vain. However, Shahudun had recently been joined by one Liu Song. He was a son of Liu Biao and had little interest or ability for campaigning. He was sent out to war all the same, and as a member of the royal house was given a degree of independence that far exceeded his worth. Therefore his presence on the Wu battlefront had achieved nothing at all, until now. He was trailing behind Shahudun during the march, making his own separate camp with his small retinue each night. This meant that when Lady Wu bypassed the main army, she ended up walking into Liu Song and his 700 bored soldiers. Thinking it was Shahudun, she took her time preparing a wide battle formation before advancing further. This gave time for Liu Song to get a rider to his general, and so just as Lady Wu began to march east, horns and drums sounded from the west. Shahudun raced his men to line up and show their full number, saving Liu Song by drawing the Wu army towards the more significant prey. Shahudun rode out ahead of the army to challenge for a duel, but in response, Lady Wu herself picked up a bow and fired a single arrow into the sky. It soared across the battlefield and fell on an unaware Shahudun from above, thudding into his helmet and drawing blood. Then the Wu army charged forwards. Shahudun just stood and waited, refusing to engage the foot soldiers as they thudded by. Behind him, Zhang Yong and Guo Jia directed the soldiers into battle. In front, Lady Wu finally sent someone out for a duel. It was a man named Gong Shuhui, of whom Shahudun had never heard. Expecting little after the introductions, he was taken by surprise when the general drew two fine swords with shimmering hilts and together parried and attacked at once. Shahudun was knocked into the mud and only just stumbled to his feet in time to receive a string of carefully coordinated blows. Indeed, Lady Wu chose her company well. Being a patron of martial arts and a keen practitioner herself, her retinue was filled with combat experts. This Gong Shuhui overpowered Shahudun seemingly without effort, and the latter turned to flee. He was only on foot, but Lady Wu ordered that no pursuit be made, shaming Shahudun yet further. This display could have spelled doom for the Liu army. But at that moment, a line of horsemen galloped in from the east, shielding Xiahou from harm and striking deep into the rear of the Wu army. The front of the army had better fortunes, with Lady Wu and Gongshu Hui cutting through line after line of troops, breaching the Liu formation right through the center. Jian Yong fled from the deadly pair. Indeed, there was no one there who could match them, and all the Liu troops could do was run about in all directions like panicked fish. The fighting on the wings was more promising. Liu Song's arrival achieved the encirclement of the Wu army. The ends of the line were pinched, and whole companies were slaughtered from all sides. This turned the battle, and soon the Liu soldiers were consuming the smaller Wu force without relent. In fact, the killing was so complete that towards the end there was scarcely anyone other than Lady Wu and Gongshu Hui still at large. Lady Wu ordered Gongshu Hui to retreat, and he obeyed. Wishing to make a point, she stayed behind and rode around the Liu troops for a while, before finally being completely surrounded and dragged into captivity. She was brought before Xiahou Dun once the army regrouped. "The Emperor has pledged to exterminate the entire clans of the villainous kings," he said. "What reason have I to let you live on after what you've done?" "I hope you won't," Lady Wu said. "If you spared me after what I've done, it would make it seem as if I was wrong to fight you, and as if it will be wrong for my children, my family, to restore this empire to reason. Kill me according to military law, and I will spare you the curses on your name." Xiahou Dun carried out the lady's request and his lord's order. Gongshu Hui heard of this and arrived at Xiahou Dun's camp a few days later to submit himself in the same manner. Xiahou Dun complied, this time feeling a lot more satisfaction for it, and finally summoning the energies to report his victory to the Empire. The news was carried beyond the Empire also, into the northern realms, where one Yuan Tan received it particularly poorly. He, eldest son of Yuan Shao, had inherited his clan's doomed enterprise. Now that the kingdom of Wu had failed to make a dent in Emperor Dongfeng's power, what hope did the thrice-defeated Yuan have? When Han troops arrived in force at his seat in Hernay, his sense of duty to his late father and brother was finally broken. The remaining Yuan lands were joined to Liu Bei's empire, and Yuan Tan was spared the extermination of his clan as an example. He was able to meet with Liu Bei personally, who now sat in the court at Hedong. With business there concluded, Liu Bei moved quickly to cross a river to the north, but on the other side he was blocked by an enormous army camp. It was Gongsun Shu, son of King Gongsun Zan, with some 2,000 veteran troops. He had rushed to Hedong to strike Liu Bei, and his prey had now stumbled right into his lair. Liu Bei's army was still exhausted from taking the city. Zhuge Liang was quick to advise a retreat. Liu Bei returned across the river, and Gongsun Shu followed. There would have been time to unite with the city garrison and turn the tables, but an unusual occurrence intervened. There were 3 men on horses who were riding in front of Gongsun Shu's army. Scouts had presumed they were officers of some capacity, foolishly leading the vanguard all in person. But it was rather a different story in reality. These 3 were Zhou Xin, Song Yang, and Le Wei Huang, lowly military officials in Liu Bei's own expansive administration. They were generals in service to Imperial Marquis Li Jian Li Ting, and had been on the run from the Yan army ever since the Yijian army was crushed on the other side of the Bing Mountains. Their flight had led Gongsun Shu right to Liu Bei. When the 3 saw the Liu banners ahead, they finally ended their flight and turned around. So imposing was their sudden halt that the Yan army halted as well, fearing foul play. As a standoff went on, news of all this reached Liu Bei. "Impossible! Such valor! We must advance and aid them," he said, but Zhuge Liang disagreed. "If we commit the army to battle for the sake of those 3 mediocre talents, how will the men trust us in the future, even if we win?" he argued. "Prime Minister, if we let them die fighting instead of us, how then can the men trust us?" Guan Yu pointed out. "If our men at least live, they can learn to trust us despite any adversity," Zhuge Liang shot back. "There is no debate to be had," Liu Bei insisted. What use does the Empire have for leaders who won't even protect their own? Assemble everyone at once! The Emperor's order had to be followed, and so the Liu army ran out to join the standoff. The wounded and the sick had to be mobilized to have any chance of matching Gongsun Shu's numbers. Guan Yu and Zhuge Liang both fell into this category. They had a severe lack of close-quarters weaponry and shields, and so could only form a narrow front, half the size of the Yan formation. But they formed it all the same. Seeing that banners were streaming from the Liu camp, and that the Yan army was turning to face them, the three Yijian generals charged forward to avenge their recent losses. Their view of the Liu army was obscured by a shallow ridge. Most likely they did not see how ill-prepared the relief force was for battle. Most of Liu Bei's able troops were crossbowmen and archers, so the best he could do to help was to shoot at the Yan army from a distance. This forced Gongsun Shu to attack the Liu troops, but it was too little too late. Zhou Xin and Luo Weihuang had already perished in their mad charge. Now that the Yan army was attacking in force, the narrow, thin Liu line appeared quite inconsequential. Your Majesty, since the matter has been decided already, we should return to camp and await a more favourable match, Zhuge Liang advised. But Liu Bei had another idea. Only by standing up to the traitor king can we act in accordance with the people's Tao, he declared. Before Zhuge Liang could argue otherwise, Liu Bei took his brother out to the head of the army. Since brother Zhang is not here, and we are destined to die on the same day, we shall brave the enemy without worry, Guan Yu assured his liege. Together they parted the Yan advance, slowing it if not by force but by confusion. Seeing this, Zhuge Liang redoubled the barrage of bolts and arrows. In this way, the Yan force saw its advantage wither away before they knew it. Guan Yu cut down General Chen Kai on the left, while in the center, Liu Bei eventually turned and fled when Yang Gang began to get the upper hand. Even in defeat, the Emperor had inspired his men with unrivaled passion, and they fought madly to resist the Yan push. With incredible energy they overcame the great mass of soldiers falling down upon them, and turned the battle around to the point when the Yan troops could not flee fast enough from Liu's scrappy band. Amid the final minutes of the fighting, Song Yang, the survivor of the trio, appeared at the Yan rear, and charged again into the fray, causing such a cheerful roar from the Liu troops that the battle was over at once. A few horsemen chased Gongsun Shu and some survivors away, while Liu Bei rushed up and bowed before Song Yang. Your bravery is nothing short of incredible, General. The Empire stands today only because of your efforts, the Emperor said. Song Yang nodded in response, then fell dead from his horse. Upon inspection, he was covered in mortal wounds. It was only by some extreme spirit that he had lasted until that moment. Liu Bei had him venerated as a hero, and ever since then people have said, even a rat would emerge from a crumbling mountain if it were only named Song Yang. Invigorated by the win, the Liu army pressed on and finished off Gongsun Shu's regrouping troops, with their leader being captured alive. He was placed before Liu Bei, who now had the responsibility to carry out his own orders of extermination. However, seeing the likeness of his childhood friend in the young man's face, he hesitated. At once, Zhuge Liang approached with a look of concern. What would the Emperor's decision be? Read on. The imperial officers were shocked when they saw Liu Bei cut Gongsun Shu's spines and rise him to his feet. Only Zhuge Liang was able to speak up. Your Majesty, this man has forfeited his life according to ancient law. If you will apply justice to some and not to others, the realm will be thrown into confusion, he said. Prime Minister, you speak with good intent, but hold your tongue, Liu Bei replied. Your Majesty, to let your personal wishes lead the law is... It could be seen as an endorsement of corrupt practices, Zhuge Liang went on, but now Liu Bei dismissed him from the tent and heard no more on the matter. Thus Gongsun Shu was sent back to his renegade father with a fresh horse and coat, and the true nature of the Gongsun clan's crime became muddied. We were like brothers, Gongsun Zan and I, Liu Bei explained to the assembled officers. To forsake that bond to pursue the cold path of military law is a violation of the people's Tao. They will understand. The officers left fuming all the same. While Gongsun Shu scurried away, Liu Bei's forces were pressing across the fractured empire with unstoppable momentum. Xiahou Dun began to conquer the recently defeated Kingdom of Wu, with Zhao Yun racing to partake in the frenzy before it was over. Zhang Fei now marched freely through Yuan Tan's fiefs, seeking to cross the Yellow River and attack the King of Yan. Zhang Chao of Guanling was camped at Yuan Tan's capital in Hebei for the same purpose. Liu Bei himself followed the Yellow River upstream, proceeding around the frontiers of the Bing Mountains for fear of what or who waited atop those narrow valleys. One day he remarked to Guan Yu, "Is it not strange to think that our great fortunes were brought about by the likes of Cao Cao?" "How did you come to that conclusion, elder brother?" Guan Yu said. "We have defeated the villains who broke the empire down, and we have the strength now to keep it whole. Yet we were only called to this path by the work of lesser monsters like Cao Cao. If he had not revealed his hand, would it be he who marches here? Cao Cao is more akin to the traitor kings than you, and more akin to a street urchin than the traitor kings. His banditry taught us the prudence of strength, but without him we would be stronger still. Why dream of improving your ship's carpentry while still at sea?" "I see a point, brother. I should be grateful we remained afloat through those storms." At that very moment, Cao Cao was encamped with a small band of followers on a plateau overlooking a wild valley in Kuai-ji. He had quietly taken a post in this impoverished county under Liu Yao, who had spoken nothing of it to the emperor. But this was no true subterfuge, for Cao Cao's soldiers were fulfilling the emperor's commands. That campsite was the border between King Wu's territory and the Han colonies on the Pacific coast. To know that Mastermind Cao was their night watchman brought great peace to those sleeping in the Vale. Cao Cao drilled his men in the cool of night and sat up writing poetry through the long days. There was little comfort to be had. The summer heat scorched the canopy he sat beneath, and the winds showed little mercy, bringing cloying air up from the humid forests. Perhaps it is for this reason he continued to sigh and stare up at the heavens, or perhaps not. All this remained a secret to Liu Bei, but some news from the interior did reach him. Bandits were marauding across the central plains and brazenly attacking imperial garrisons. Liu Bei scoffed at such reports. "We have already crushed the bandits. This must be a ploy by Gongsun Zan to draw us away. Pay it no heed," he said. "Your Majesty, while your actions against the bandits of the realm are well known, it is not impossible that more have arisen since," Zhuge Liang cautioned. "The people would not dare. Think of their debt to me. What would they not do to uphold their end of the bargain? What is this bargain, Your Majesty? The restoration of peace and the empire. We have ended their chaos. Why would they become bandits now? The people are good, but when the people's Tao is ignored, they wander astray. Then what must we do? What is the people's Tao? If talk is to be believed, they lack for food and for virtuous constables. Our enterprise cannot profit them otherwise." Liu Bei thought on this, then laughed. "Prime Minister, for all your studies, you have missed a plain-faced scheme. The traitors would have us deny our troops food for marching and draw away our good men from their heroic place. It was too obvious. Please be more diligent, Prime Minister." "Of course, Your Majesty, I will review this," Zhuge Liang said with a bow, feeling his chest tighten. "Perhaps we can speak on it again tomorrow," he added. "Enough of this, we have more pressing matters, and I've more counsel than yours to keep," Liu Bei said. Indeed, the next day Liu Bei had a private meeting with General Liu Bu. He was asking for more powers to suppress a surge in Yellow Turban activity in Shenyang, and Liu Bei granted it without hesitation. Liu Bu was named the hero who upholds the earth, and given freedom to root out agitators as he saw fit. Hearing of this, Zhuge Liang urgently wrote to Pang Tong, Liu Bu's advisor, supplying a ream of instructions on how to properly contain the turbans. Pang Tong replied with news that he had been dismissed from his post as soon as Liu Bu received his seal of authority. Reading this, Zhuge Liang felt his chest convulse again. "Great minds cast down, good men cast down. How can I save the empire when it pulls out its heart so?" he lamented. Guan Yu, in waiting outside Zhuge Liang's tent, heard these words clearly and then snuck away with a furrowed brow. In the southlands, Zhao Yun, Xiahou Dun, Liu Cong and Mi Ju snaked their armies down rivers and through narrow passes to attack Wu towns in Poyang, Yujiang and Luling. There was no sign of King Sun Ce. These advances were like a noose tightening on Poyang City, the location of the Wu Imperial Palace, Sun Ce's lavish and expansive compound. Wherever the Liu armies marched, civilians streamed out to offer provisions. When they were not accepted, they knelt and begged for forgiveness for their service to the traitor instead. Xiahou Dun cared not for this and shooed them back home. Mi Ju used the opportunity to recruit colonists for a city he was cultivating along the Tong'an coast, of which he was de facto ruler in the absence of court oversight. Liu Cong was amused at the peasants' subordination and was brought to a cheerful state of clemency. Zhao Yun sent the village elders to Liu Bei in chains and left the rest with grave warnings. In his message to the emperor, he wrote that if he had not needed to hurry on towards Poyang City, he would have seen justice to its conclusion. When Zhuge Liang was announced at Liu Bei's camp, Guan Yu quickly said to the emperor, "Brother, the Prime Minister will complain that Zhao Yun's judgment is untrustworthy. We had best keep this from him, or we'll get an earful." Liu Bei agreed. On the other side of the Bing Mountains, Zhang Chao had arrived with his troops at the city of Ye, close to Liu Bei's hometown. There he was to wait for Zhang Fei to form the vanguard of a campaign against the Kingdom of Yan. But events had moved faster than expected. The King of Yan himself arrived in the city shortly after Zhang Chao encamped on a hill outside it. The next morning, troops were seen streaming from the city gates, and Zhang Chao nervously formed up for battle. That Gongsun Zan himself was present was evident by the shining horses trotting at the Yan rear. These were the elite White Riders of the north, men from whom the Empire's enemies on the northern border would flee upon their merest mention. They were so named for their brilliant white horses, illuminating the battlefield and striking the image of heaven descending to earth. Gongsun Zan ordered his footmen to climb the hill and challenge Zhang Chao, but he remained with the White Riders in the lowlands close to the city. His strategist Guan Jing was puzzled by this arrangement. "Your Majesty, this Zhang Chao is no military man. Why not sweep him aside with our full force? I see no profit in caution," he said. "Master Guan, did you already forget?" Gongsun Zan said, shaking his head. "Usurper Dongfeng spared the life of my son. What will people say of me if I carry on like there is no honor to be found there? Therefore, until the sun reaches its zenith, I will give him clemency. Go and observe their movements and bid them flee. I will repay Liu Bei's single spared head with that of a whole army. Who will say he has surpassed me then?" With this, Guan Jing marched his army close to Zhang Chao's formation and lined them up in good order. Then he sent a rider requesting a truce so that he might explain the King of Yan's offer. The reply was a volley of arrows, just barely reaching the Yan lines but causing wounds all the same. "Those barbarians!" General Huang Long raged. "Let's attack them!" "No, General, His Majesty ordered we bid them leave. We must try again," Guan Jing said. 3 times messages were sent to Zhang Chao, but he only responded with arrows. Gongsun Zan, grazing his horses on the plain below, wondered what could be causing the delay. In truth, Zhang Chao was petrified of the White Riders and dared not move to leave lest they pursue him. Thus, Gongsun Zan's magnanimous gesture of peace inflamed Zhang Chao's will to fight. He eventually ordered his lines to attack the Yan formation in front of them. Guan Jing was forced to respond in turn. Seeing this, Gongsun Zan rallied his riders and began trotting towards the loudening din of battle. Runners arrived begging he attack as soon as possible, but the King of Yan would not increase his pace. "If mercy is so foreign to them that they do not even recognize it, then they will be defeated with mercy. If that is not possible, then I have no interest in defeating them at all," he proclaimed. This principled stance was of little use to the men he had already sent into mortal peril. The arrows fell as thick as rain, and the Liu soldiers spread out to surround them. Huang Long made a furious charge out, and many of the Yan troops followed him. However, many also remained with panicking Guan Jing. Thus the Yan army was swallowed in pieces by the Liu advance, whose cavalry rushed back and forth, freely attacking whomever turned their backs. Gongsun Zan had begun his ascent of the hill. He knew of the battle's progress only by further runners, now bloodied, and by the sight of men scrambling away from the scene, alone or in small groups. He was experienced enough to know what would await him at the top, but carried on without second thought. When he reached the top, there was a great cheer from the Liu troops. They had reformed just beyond the crest, and while the battlefield was behind them, the bodies had quickly been piled up and marked with captured banners. The men did not fear the White Riders so much after an exhilarating slaughter. They taunted and cheered without halt, and even lowly spearmen begged the King of Yan for a duel, to much merriment. Zhang Ba rode up and down the line, showing off Huang Long's dripping head. Seeing all this, Gongsun Zan simply pointed forwards and said, "Heaven sees traitors in plain sight, and knows which of us is more virtuous. All who speak of this battle will realize what weight we have given to brutes, and what shallow stones our empire rests upon." Horns were sounded, and the White Riders charged. The Liu officers pulled their men together and instructed them to brace their spears to the front. A wall of points and shields was made, but the riders galloped upon it as if it was open ground. There was a terrible clash, but the tumbling of the foremost horses halted the charge. The Liu men swarmed forward and brought up crossbows to punch through the gleaming armour the riders wore. All was done before the second wave approached, led by Gongsun Zan himself. The king ordered his followers to outflank the line, while he attacked the centre on his own. He was knocked from his horse almost at once, yet the amazed foot soldiers then dared not approach him. He stood and brandished a huge halberd club, an imposing weapon from the north. A few men tried to attack him, but they were overcome by the king's rough strength. Eventually, spurred on by shouts from General Zhang Ba, some men managed to subdue the king and drag his weapon away. He was put before Jiang Chao, where Zhang Ba advocated for his execution. But before Jiang Chao could decide, Gongsun Zan said, "I offered you much, and gave you more, Lord Zhang. If only I could offer you the realm, perhaps the death would end. But then again, you aren't in opposition to death, are you?" These words gave Jiang Chao apprehensions, and he claimed he was going to imprison Gongsun Zan and send him to Liu Bei. But then that night the prisoner disappeared from camp while supposedly under guard. Beyond the palisade, the king found a white Ba horse wandering the countryside, clear to see by moonlight, and left the front lines. While an opportunity to end the war seems to have passed by, the victory did prompt the surrender of Ye City, shrinking Gongsun Zan's kingdom. Another similar opportunity was soon at hand in the south. Xiahou Dun had halted his march east, for Sun Ce himself had brought an army to block the road. He was supported by Cheng Pu, a formidable servant of the late Sun Jian, founder of their powerful family enterprise. The reputation of these two alone was enough to warrant a halt, but indeed that same reputation brought to mind a scheme. Xiahou Dun ordered Liu Cong to assemble his army of raw recruits in plain sight, while he took the elite troops to hide behind a steep mountain ridge. As hoped, when the hot-headed Sun Ce scouted this position out, he saw a chance to strike at a weak, politically lucrative target. This taste for opportunity had brought him success in expanding his family's domain across the Southlands, but Xiahou Dun had seen such confidence too many times for it to go unpunished. Sun Ce led the vanguard across a river to approach Liu Cong, while Cheng Pu brought up the main force trailing behind. In his haste to attack, Sun Ce put a few hours of distance between himself and Cheng Pu, plenty of time for Xiahou Dun to emerge and cut the road to the front and rear. Sun Ce was at the very head of the column. He was the first to see Xiahou Dun riding at full pelt towards him. While his men were struck with fear, Sun Ce himself was simply angry and called out to Xiahou Dun to settle things one-on-one. Xiahou Dun slowed down and said,
boy, I killed your mother to end this. Now I will only kill your men. Flee, submit, so that none of us need see the blood of another again."
This booming command from the one-eyed champion gave Sun Ce a shake in his sword hand. Shahudun rode on, drawing the king's view back to the rest of the column. Men were being cut down as they tried to flee, and those that fought were already surrounded. Shahudun slit the throat of a general with the tip of his spear, then sat still on his horse, watching his foe's body gradually slide out of the saddle and slump onto the dusty road. With a burning pain in his throat all of a sudden, Sun Ce rode away. The vanguard was torn to pieces, with only a few hundred men making it back across the river to report the disaster to Changpu. He withdrew from the river at once, and on the very same day Shahudun and Liu Zong moved up to make a crossing without contest. In his flight, Sun Ce came across his lead advisor Lu Su, and at last felt the panic fade. Lu Su escorted his king back to the Southland's capital, Poyang, but as they approached, they received shocking news. Zhao Yun, having raced from the Yangtze unopposed, had already surrounded the city with a veteran army. At this, Sun Ce despaired even more deeply than in his previous flight, and was inconsolable. Lu Su suggested all manner of other escape routes, but Sun Ce rubbished them all. Then Lu Su proposed something rather more strange, and Sun Ce was only silent. Soon the pair were riding on again, seeking the Yangtze themselves. What manner of a plan had Lu Su devised? Read on. The city of Shihe sat among the final string of hills on the border of the Great Western Plain. It was Queen Zhengjiang's base of operations, and hence had attracted the attention of Emperor Liu Bei. At the close of summer in 197, elite imperial troops scaled the walls during the night and threw open the gates. The emperor was disappointed with what he met inside. The bandit queen was nowhere to be found. Still, he would not go a single evening without a prestigious guest, for a pair of bedraggled travellers hiked up from the Yellow River at dusk. When their names were reported to Liu Bei, it was beyond belief. The emperor went out to see the pair for himself. One wore a simple traveller's tunic, but the taller wore burgundy plate armour with a fine tiger fur draped over the shoulders. He held in his hand a dragon of crafted jade, dull in the torchlight. It was offered to and accepted by the emperor, and that is how Sun Ce, Emperor of Wu, rendered his submission. It was always said that the great house of Sun valued results over prestige, Liu Bei said. With this act, Lord Sun, you have proven that 1,000-fold. The Southlands will sing your praises as highly as your great ancestor Sun Tzu. At this, Sun Ce burst into tears and could not be convinced to relent, let alone eat or drink. His seat of honour at the great feast that evening was taken instead by the Jade Dragon, the seal of his kingly power. Beside it sat Lu Su, Wu's lead strategist. He spoke well, but always seemed to glare when Zhuge Liang proposed a toast. Eventually, the Prime Minister invited him outside and said, "You are well known on the scholarly scene, Lu Su. Surely you have no reason to doubt your judgment this day." "What do you mean, Prime Minister?" Lu Su replied. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but was this course of events not your scheme? You might be made Lord of all the Southlands for this great deed." "Prime Minister, I have been holding back, but since you are prying, I will tell you. To reach you, we travelled the Yangtze, through Jing, through the capital districts, and along the Yellow River. Was there a single day when we were not looked upon by hungry eyes, by bandits, by constables with pockets as thirsty as the sky? Were it not for the heroic bearing of my lord, we surely would have met a foul end. This is your empire. What carelessness allows you, a famous scholar yourself, to claim to be Prime Minister of this charade? Master Lu, were all in this empire as honest as you, we would forever be at peace," Zhuge Liang laughed. "But surely you learned the basics of alchemy. We are on the point of preparing our ingredients. When I begin to mix, the nature of the blend can bear no resemblance to its base at all. And but a boy dares lecture me. You should take my head now, for the likes of I will only cause you trouble in the future. "I'm counting on it, Master Liu," Zhuge Liang said, taking his leave. Lu Su looked up at the stars and said, "How can a man believe that all the stars transit around him? How can a man believe anything else? Great understanding and great ambition, the left and right eyes of the dragon. Did they open too soon or too late?" Sun Ce and Lu Su were given a substantial collection of fine treasures and a large troop of bodyguards, then sent to reside at the main court in Donghai. In the meantime, Liu Bei's officials flooded into the Southlands and took control of the commandery and county administrations of Wu. The Kingdom of Wu effectively ceased to exist, and the civil war in the south was over. The fanfare and celebrations for those in the pro-Liu faction were amplified by news of the northern civil war, in which Zhang Fei and Zhang Chao had captured two of Gongsun Zan's cities. More triumphs would follow. Zhang Chao advanced to the walls of Zhongshan, where he was met by a resurgent Yuan Shu. Indeed, self-styled Emperor Zhong was not caught amid the crumbling of his realm, and now the King of Yan was revealed to be not only a pretender himself, but an abettor to a pretender also. No cleaner condemnation of Gongsun Zan's scheme was needed for the loyal subjects of the mandated Emperor Dongfeng. Yuan Shu was soundly defeated in brief engagements and scurried north to his king in the city of Dai. Zhang Fei arrived in the days following this rout, and the fate of Zhongshan seemed sealed. However, before an attack was made, Yan banners approached again. A large army travelled down from Dai, waving banners that read, "The worthy of the new era." This was the imperial army of Yan, led by Qin Wenmeng, a commandant of the old capital district around Luoyang. This old guard general had no second thoughts about challenging Zhang Fei for single combat, no matter his fearsome reputation. Seeing the challenge, Zhang Fei roared and charged out alone. Delighted, Qin Wenmeng ordered her army to attack at once, then drew her blade to do her part. With a single swipe, she sent Zhang Fei tumbling from his horse, then jumped down to grapple with the enraged beast in the mud. In this way, she denied the Liu army its general at the very moment her troops were attacking. But alas, this scheme was predicated on a critical misunderstanding. Zhang Fei was not the director of his army. Intolerant of reading and unreflective in victory, Zhang Fei knew little of battlecraft despite his vast experience witnessing it. Therefore it was Chu Shu whom the army runners reported to, and he responded to the Yan scheme calmly. The front ranks were narrowed and deepened to buy more time, and Huang Gai drew up in front with a huge battle axe, inflicting cloying nerves upon the charging men. Additionally, the Yan army had lacked for horses ever since Gongsun Zan's pointed sacrifice at Ye, and so was quickly surrounded by the Liu riders advancing on the wings. With these two measures, the Yan vanguard floundered and their rear was imperiled. Qin Wanming's gambit had failed, and once Zhang Fei struggled away and recovered his serpent spear, she was slain with a single thrust. All round, troops were scattered away from the Liu cavalry, and the battle seemed lost. However, the vanguard knew nothing of this, and pressed into the Liu formation with high hopes. A Yan officer from the rear rode forward to order a retreat, but a volley of arrows struck he and horse down. By the time those engaged in the fighting realized what was going on behind them, it was too late. The Liu troops surrounded them, while catapults and riders massacred those already fleeing. Zhang Fei and Huang Gai were like whirlwinds, slaying Yan men by the dozen. Following their example, the Liu soldiers completed the task with great enthusiasm. The counterattack had been crushed, and Zhongshan surrendered shortly after. Zhang Chao secured the rich lands and food stores across the rest of the commandery. This cut the supply of food to Dai City, only a week's march north of Zhongshan. The fall of the pretender was in sight, but Liu Bei ordered a halt to the advance on account of a strange matter. Back in Shihe, Liu Bei had exerted great efforts investigating the whereabouts of Zheng Jiang. No answer was found, but he discovered that her husband, Wu Jing, had been sent away from the mountains the previous year. Records from the capital brought up two mentions of his name. In the first, he was named as the secretary adjutant of the Pengcheng Temple district under Governor Gao Ding. In the second, only a month old, he was noted as being quartermaster of Ba, a post in Shu under Governor Yu Minshang. For the husband of a bandit queen to hold two seemingly unrelated posts in Liu Bei's government was notable. To the emperor, it was more than that. "This scoundrel is clearly posing as an appointed official in order to supply the bandits with information," he claimed to his entourage. "That is why Queen Zheng continues to elude us. He must be punished." "Brother, shall we inquire with Lord Gao and Lady Yu?" Guan Yu said. "It is possible they really did appoint this man, and if so, their relation to any betrayal must be established." "Quite right, brother. These twines of corruption will lead us right to the Queen." "Your Majesty, if we accuse our vassals wrongly, they will feel outcast. How will they trust you then? Let us send a man of our own to learn more about this Wu Jing," Zhuge Liang suggested. "Did you not hear? He is married to Queen Zheng. How can his movements be innocent? Send to Lady Yu at once. She is to surrender her seal and accept new appointments in Bashu according to the Prime Minister's judgment, and order that Wu Jing be brought to me." These orders led to the dissolution of the Yu clan and the spreading of doubt among the other vassal clans of House Liu. Seeing as House Liu was the primary beneficiary of the reallocation of fiefs, there was much talk of betrayal of the highest order. Yet Liu Bei's reputation begot him great trust among the people, who maintained that whatever crimes the Yu clan was accused of, they were surely guilty. Shortly after, Wu Jing was presented to Liu Bei in Shihe. His forehead scarcely left the ground, and his shaken voice was almost unintelligible. "Your Majesty, what do you intend to do with this man?" Zhuge Liang asked Liu Bei. "For his crimes there is only one recourse: execution. How else can we show the realm that we are watching for and eliminating corruption?" "A noble intent. However, just because you have found a man staying at an inn, you cannot know which direction he was travelling prior, or which direction he will travel in the morning. We must ascertain the facts of the matter. A disloyal man will permit no facts to stand. Perhaps leisurely scholars can waste their time with such games, but we must achieve great things. Forget his story, whatever it may be. It is his spirit that holds his righteousness, and in times of war, the spirit can be tested clearly. I will give him a great responsibility and observe his performance. In his position, a loyal man will succeed at all costs." "Your Majesty, your wisdom humbles me," Zhuge Liang conceded. Thus Wu Jing was given a test, an assignment of vital importance. He was to lead the vanguard against Gongsun Zan. Having some military experience, Wu Jing took to the task eagerly. Was his eagerness a cover for his true intent, or was it gratitude towards his emperor? While the high officials speculated, Liu Bei wrote a letter to Zhang Fei and had Guan Yu personally deliver it. After a happy reunion for the two brothers in Zhongshan, Guan Yu showed Zhang Fei the letter. "Brother's gone mad!" Zhang Fei shouted without hesitation. Guan Yu hastily dismissed the servants, then said, "It seems his obsession with the bandit has got the better of him. But if you're thinking of forsaking your oath for a nobody like Wu Jing, then your villainy will be remembered more clearly than that of Gongsun Zan and Sun Ce combined." "Why are you saying this? I'll do whatever brother wants. Who cares about that rat Wu Jing? I just thought elder brother didn't have the guts to pull a stunt like this." "The mantle of emperor is high, but elder brother ascends like a phoenix towards heaven." You've spent too long with that bookworm, brother. Come on, another round of wine." Amid the drinking, Zhang Fei sent out runners with orders for all of his commanders, including newly arrived Wu Jing. North of Zhongshan, another Yan army had been assembled and stood on the path of advance towards Dai. Wu Jing accepted the task of breaking through with apparent enthusiasm. He was given 1,000 men, and 3,000 more under Zheng Qiao were promised. Wasting no time, Wu Jing rode out onto the snow-covered plains outside the Yan camp and challenged for battle. As the Yan force assembled, he thought, "If I best one of their champions, I will have truly proven myself. I won't get this chance again, so I cannot fail." With this, he rode off ahead of his army to close in with the foe. As he did, however, the officers Zhang Fei had given orders to quietly halted. Keeping the horns silent and the banners in good order, the army began withdrawing to the city. Jiang Chao, following orders to patrol towns in the countryside, did not even know this offensive was taking place. Therefore it was only Wu Jing and no more than 40 riders who raced up to face down the Yan army. Wielding a simple spear, he waved out a challenge for battle. Yuan Yao, son of Yuan Shu and would-be imperial prince, emerged with a short halberd in each hand. His sister, Yuan Anyang, brought the army closer to witness the duel and cheer for their fighter. Wu Jing had no such support. The two battled for 30 bouts, each wounding the other several times. However, Wu Jing had caught on that his army was no longer approaching. At this he faltered, and after 3 more bouts, Yuan Yao slashed out with his twin halberds, striking to the left and right at once, cutting Wu Jing's hands cleanly from his arms. Still holding the spear, they tumbled to the ground. Wu Jing's blood painted the snow at his feet, and within moments he too fell. Yuan Yao survived his wounds after being pulled back to camp, but Wu Jing was left where he fell, by both sides. In this way, Wu Jing was, according to Liu Bei's subsequent proclamation, absolved of his crimes. Zhuge Liang had heard of Wu Jing's summons, but not his demise, and raced to see the emperor.
That old man thought he could make a name for himself in the empire. Since I was allied to you, I let him serve in your ranks as he wished, Zhuge Liang said. I heard you suspect him of foul play. Worry not. It is he who suspected me and quit my house without proper proceedings. I would like to have him back so that our marriage might be undone according to heavenly law.
Liu Bei laughed and said, If that was your intention, then heaven has granted you a great boon. Allow me to show you a gift my younger brother sent me just yesterday. A lacquered box was produced by an attendant. Liu Bei tilted it towards Zhuge Liang and opened it after a savouring delay. Inside was Wu Jing's head. His skin, like boiling water, suddenly turned to ice. Zhuge Liang gave no reaction, her stare even and her breathing slow. Liu Bei appeared to be waiting for her to say something, but she was not forthcoming. Eventually the emperor returned the box to a servant. This marriage that concerns you so has been dealt with, he said.
How did you do it? Zhuge Liang said.
I did nothing. It was the traitor Gongsun who killed him, after I promoted him most highly on account of his noble association with you.
Then how did you come upon his head?
That was the work of my younger brother. I have no notion of what deeds he performed to recover it, but he knows what it's worth to you. Perhaps you will join me in a letter of thanks.
Can the drunkard Zhang even read?
My queen, whatever you have heard about my brother, I assure you it's untrue. You will learn otherwise in time.
I wonder. Your Majesty, I dare not waste your time speaking to bandits. Your court must be tired of this already. Let us resume our posts.
Wait, Lady Zheng. You have forgotten the most crucial fact of the matter. Now that you are without husband, you will be in want of one. I, a humble man given great responsibility, have long admired your passion, strength, and loyalty to the House of Han. In fact, even in our brief meetings over the years, you have brought me more joy than any of my concubines. Given this, I would be willing to allow you into my household, if you would be pleased by it. Zhuge Liang stood, a great offence in itself, and spat on the stair before Liu Bei's command chair.
Liu Bei, you long-eared mat-weaver! I am loyal to my people, and they were loyal to Emperor Shan. Since you have done away with him, they have only me, and I have only them. We look out for each other because the likes of you can only be our enemies. What right have the people to starve and you to rule? This empire is like a dance performed in driving rain. Our solace from misery, yet ensnaring, and thus the cause of that misery. I would rather eat my children and rip out my innards than be your concubine. Order it of me and I will do it, because when I speak true. Order me to render myself at this instant, Emperor, or never presume to command my people again.
This performance left Liu Bei speechless. Guards moved up to do whatever he bid, but he could bid nothing. He left the room without a word. Zhuge Liang, the highest official, bowed to Zhuge Liang and said, I cannot repay you, Lady Zheng. Go, and I will see that our lord keeps to your wishes. Lady Zheng nodded to the Prime Minister and took her leave. Zhuge Liang smiled and left to see if Liu Bei was affected by all this as he had predicted. Indeed, Liu Bei was distraught. His attempts to avoid tears were failing, and he dismissed Zhuge Liang over and over, but the Prime Minister would not leave the Emperor's chamber. Eventually, Liu Bei calmed down.
I wanted to believe she was an honest woman. I wanted to be wrong about her lies, but it was all true. And now Wu Jing is dead, and the lords are up in arms over this whole affair. Who knew that on the verge of victory heaven would cast me so low? He moaned. Your Majesty, is it the case that you do not understand Lady Zheng's apprehensions? Zhuge Liang said. Not at all. If she were not a bandit but my empress, how could she claim the empire was ensnaring her in misery? She is a rogue even to herself. Your Majesty, Lord Liu Bei, the lady plays a most important role in your life. She is the deepest of the 5 gates to heaven. Would you like me to explain it? Liu Bei wiped his eyes and gave a gentle nod. What was the nature of Zhuge Liang's counsel? Read on. The rustic court at Shihe was awash with the patter of rain on the yellowed tiles. In the main bedchamber, Liu Bei sat on a mat looking over at Zhuge Liang, who was rolling some paper out across the floor. Taking ink, brush and weights from the table under the window, he sat. Who else could have the Emperor's ear so enthralled but he in that moment? Who else wielded the mandate of heaven with such craft? Zhuge Liang took a long breath and began the lesson taught to him by the long empty skies of Sleeping Dragon Ridge. Your Majesty, there is not a single thing that has happened which was not vital to the salvation of the Empire and the establishment of the 5 powers. You are at the center of this, and your despair only shows that the final gateway must now be traversed. Allow me to lay it out for you, Your Majesty, and the journey you have undertaken will seem clear. Liu Bei sat up and looked his mentor in the eyes. Zhuge Liang had his usual wry smile, but it faded as he began reciting. Although you are of noble lineage, your father left you nothing. However, in your spirit you knew your destiny. By not abandoning your Liu name and asserting your rights as a scion of the royal house, you went from a mat weaver to a prestigious general and sought after advisor. In this way, you mastered the concept of nobility. And yet devious men plagued the empire and refused to let peace settle. They forced you to fight, and in doing so, brought upon themselves great humiliation. For your selection of men and officers was exquisite, and your bravery employing them in war unrivaled. In battle after battle, you showed that you could not be conquered. In this way, you mastered the concept of a warrior. In victory you gained much, but your enemies redoubled their efforts at every turn, and each step towards salvation seemed to worsen the Empire's woes also. But despite the upheaval, you found the time to visit stubborn pedants in mountaintop retreats and humble yourself before their learning. In this way, you mastered the concept of scholarship. Then, when the great peril against the Han finally faded, you knew what had to be done to stabilize the dynasty. You took pity upon Emperor Xian and allowed him to rest while you shouldered his burden. At last the final connection with the usurper Dong was severed, and the realm was set at ease. Great sicknesses were cured and restless nights banished, as all those in your care praised a bold and righteous son of heaven at last. Amid the Empire's joy, you mastered the hearts of the people. Finally, with the 4 worldly masteries in your possession, the Empire was restored. But to make permanent this achievement, the otherworldly mastery, the 5th, must be sought. This is the true meaning behind Zhengjiang's disposition. You, Your Majesty, must become the Tao, the uniting force between all things. Understand all this, and Queen Zheng will join you as naturally as a flower sprouts from a stem. Ignore all this, and be only contented that at least the new great cycle of death is not here at this moment. Liu Bei was no scholar, and had only the faintest grasp of his tutor's meaning. He asked, Master, how do I become the Tao? How can I make the Empire eternal? There is a simple method, of great difficulty to employ. It is known as inviting 5 into the hall with 4 seats. It is a strange practice,
familiar to the likes of Queen Zheng, familiar too to Gong Du and Huang Shao, I dare say. However, this method is so unusual that I dare not present it to you, Your Majesty. Please, Master, your wisdom has already saved the Empire, and your strategies fell rebels like reeds. How can I go on knowing that I'm too ignorant to protect the Han? Your Majesty, I did not say this method would protect the Han, but only the Empire. Liu Bei begged Zhuge Liang to go on, and finally he did. Every time the Empire falls, it is because it takes but a mote of corruption to stall the entire enterprise. The crisis of our age was caused by but 10 eunuchs and an emperor without the will to employ his powers. This simple mistake, common among the 10,000 villages, killed untold millions like a tiger in the streets. What if there had been 100 eunuchs? How many of them would have possessed that rare virtue that renders them suitable for high office? Perhaps one? Perhaps eunuchs are not suitable at all. Shall we add 100 nobles, 100 warriors, 100 scholars, 100 commoners? Will any possess great virtue? What if it were 1,000? 10,000? Why take a chance? Could we not imagine all people? If there is none great enough to lead among all people, then that failure rests on heaven, and we need not exert ourselves further. But if there is even one great enough to lead, what effort is not too great to seek this person out? It would be impossible with only 10 scouts, a lifelong endeavour with 1,000, a costly campaign with 10,000, but if all were to search out the good and pass over the bad? Finding worthy officials would be as easy as turning over your hand. This is the secret to inviting 5 into the hall with 4 seats. When you must choose one of the 5 to leave, the number of voices must be beyond bribery, beyond chance evils, and encompassing all 4 of the worldly classes. Therefore, the mandate of heaven, which is wont to flicker between families like a butterfly across a meadow, can be known. And in time, one will focus their eyes and see that the butterfly is one of a swarm, dancing back and forth endlessly, visible to those who have embraced the Tao, and comprehensible not to any one man, but only to mankind's unified will. The world can be set to order forever if this can be achieved. You must ensure that across the realm, no one has power they have not earned, and no one has power that can be better wielded by those below them. The first man to follow these rules must be you. That is why I say the Han will not be saved. But the world you, the last scion of the Han, protected, will last forever. Upon hearing these final words, Liu Bei finally collapsed to the ground, unconscious. He dreamt of that great field of flowers, and saw above it a huge jade butterfly. From the 4 corners of the sky came dragons, who set upon the butterfly like wolves upon a deer. Then the butterfly burst open, and an uncountable number of smaller butterflies of all colours were cast out in all directions. The dragons, swooping around, were unable to catch them, and returned to their distant palaces beyond the sky. The butterflies settled among the field, and fluttered this way and that without warning. When Liu Bei woke up, the rain had ceased, and the cold mountain winds were battering lit candles all around. And so when freed, the people fear the dragons no more, Zhuge Liang sung, concluding a ballad written out on a stretch of silk he was inspecting. He did not speak aloud the poet's signature, which read, Huang Shao, wielder of the heavenly way. The first light of dawn was visible when Liu Bei finally summoned the strength to rise. Zhuge Liang handed him some pages, military dispatches. Younger brother has done it. The kingdom of Yan is no more, Liu Bei said. So then, this empire is yours. Whatever you wish to do with it, I shall await your command, the Prime Minister said, finally taking his leave. Liu Bei could not enjoy the silence left in his wake, for the noise of the strange wisdom previously imparted was inescapable. Servants brought him breakfast, but he dismissed them without a glance. The food was untouched when they returned at midday. By then, Liu Bei had come to a decision. We must seek out Queen Zheng and make her people our own, he announced to the court. Only then will the way forward be clear. No one but the Prime Minister knew what this meant, but the order was straightforward. His army linked up with Shahudun's marching column arriving from the south, and entered the Bandit Queen's mountain commandery of Taiyuan. Meanwhile, Zhang Fei led efforts to pacify Gongsun Zan's remaining fiefs in the northeast, and Pang Tong and Zhao Yun were sent far out into Xiliang to defeat rogue governor Han Sui. In these campaigns, the might of the imperial armies was far beyond resisting, but making a show of doing so regardless was the last act of defiance the ostracized nobles could muster. Therefore, the civil war was in fact to continue, quietening more and more for another year. Liu Bei captured Taiyuan, killing many of Zheng Jiang's belligerent subordinates in the process. The queen herself remained elusive, and her remaining followers were too loyal to disclose anything. Thus, Liu Bei was frustrated, and his understanding of Zhuge Liang's scheme remained murky. In the summer of the year 199, the final blows of the war were struck. In the distant reaches of the empire, beside the banks of the river that marked the entrance to the strange world of the west, Shahudun slaughtered the last band of Han Sui's stubborn retinue. After the work was carried out, he rode over to Jianyong and said, "Take care of my horse, will you? She's earned a rest." "Where are you going, General?" Jianyong asked. Shahudun shook his head. "People will say we have achieved much. I will not. Lord Jan, I will never think of what we did for this empire again. You may write what you wish of it, and of me. Farewell." With this, he handed over the reins to his horse, dismounted, and walked away. "General Shahu, what of the Emperor's orders?" Jianyong called. "If they reach me before I cross that river, I will obey," Shahudun replied, not turning around. He threw down several pieces of his armor, then hurled his spear high into the air. It soared over 100 meters, then thudded down onto the opposite bank of the river. Without delay, he entered the water and swam through it as if the current was not rushing along, cutting a straight path to the opposite bank. There he grabbed his spear, dragged himself onto the bank, and trudged onward into the vast deserts beyond. Somewhere over the horizon, a single road snaked off to lands unknowably distant and foreign. Such was the will of that tiger general of the Han. On the opposite side of the empire, in the imperial capital of Donghai, Liu Bei sat down on his throne, and 1,000 officials bowed throughout the grand hall of his palace. Among them were Sun Ce, Yuan Tan, Xi She, Ma Teng, Chen Chao, Yijan Liting, Tong Yurei, Kong Rong, Gao Ding, Liu Yan, Liu Yao, and Liu Biao. Between them all, the realm bowed to their single monarch. Missing was Zheng Jiang. Liu Bei thought back to the instruction Zhuge Liang had given him a year prior, and decided, "In the wake of our great achievement, the people have been disturbed. Food rots while peasants starve. How can we claim victory in this state? I have an idea to solve this matter. Why not instruct the county officials to handle it? Who has time to petition the emperor for aid if their village goes hungry? Let them request food from the county offices. Should any official ignore such a request out of malice, then 5 candidate replacements will be found, and any who care to do so can submit cases for and against each one to the commandery. With this practice, a virtuous man can be reckoned according to the Tao, and hunger will be like fog lifted to heaven by the sun. Who will say the empire is a menace then?" This instruction was called seditious and unfilial, but it was the emperor's will. It seemed to violate the old principles of governorship, and yet it began to blossom. After the year's harvest, surplus food was bought up and ferried about by the county constables, bringing joy to those with ruined fields and homes. The surplus, upon investigation, far exceeded the empire's needs. Only such a deadly oversight could have brought an empire as powerful as the Han to the brink of destruction. Winter approached, but all had their stores in order, and the farms were already being expanded by those eager to profit more from this market. Additionally, the later details of the edict saw many officials rise and fall. In Kuaiji, a man named Cao Cao was chosen as magistrate after appeals from nobles, warriors, scholars, and the people alike. With others ready to take his place, how could he be complacent? The county's roads were paved so that his caravans might impress the people with their speed, and the nobles were allowed to accompany their produce so that their productivity could garner them prestige. In this way, and ways similar, the empire came to be truly at peace and surpassed that which had come before. With Zhuge Liang nodding along beside him, Liu Bei allowed several other officers to both act as they saw fit in many matters, but be subject to the popular test of competence. This caused the number of matters directly concerning the emperor and his high officials to decrease, which brought those high officials a feeling of uneasiness. Perhaps that too could be attended to, but Liu Bei's taste for politics did not last long beyond that winter of 199. He was ever searching for information on Zhuge Liang, who had still not resurfaced. "Have I not embodied the Tao?" Liu Bei complained to Zhuge Liang. "If you have to ask, then you have not. Such is the nature of the Tao," he replied. Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, overhearing this conversation from nearby, were bitter to hear this religious talk carrying on. "That bookworm might as well be the emperor," Zhang Fei said. "Or there might as well be no emperor at all, the way he insists everyone else handles matters," Guan Yu said. "He's up to no good. Elder brother seems to be under his spell, so we'll have to watch him closely." "And be rid of him quickly," Zhang Fei added. Long, idle days carried on, with the two brothers staying as close to Liu Bei as they could. But Zhuge Liang had already planted all the seeds required, for Liu Bei continued adjusting the county, commandery, and provincial administrations according to the Tao. It was decreed that any man able to solicit a bribe from a government post could rightfully claim that post themselves. This overturned the method of doing things from the smallest village to the highest halls. The sea of officials belonging to the imperial court was tempestuous over the following year, with people being appointed only to be removed at once in some cases. While appeals to intervene arrived at the imperial court constantly, Liu Bei waved them away with the retort, "How can heaven be concerned with this?" Discontent among the highest government ranks grew. However, Zhuge Liang's scheme was too far along to overcome. Indeed, now that so many posts were constantly harried by rival incumbents, the people, the soldiers, lacked unified loyalty to the current occupant. The crux of the Prime Minister's genius was to turn people's affection from their patrons within the government to the system of government itself. Thus, the realm endured and grew out of its sickness at an astounding rate. Like an island rising from the depths of the ocean, the Han Empire, or perhaps simply the Chinese Empire, became ever more complex and ever more indomitable. Innovations in agriculture, sailing, writing, and music began to fill the pages of the official records, and while many would scoff at it all, they were like herdsmen refusing to step back from a growing fire. By the end of summer in the year 203, Zhuge Liang's reforms were in place, but for a single detail. The office of emperor still had its mandate untested. Since the highest office could not be appointed by its natural superior, Zhuge Liang devised another approach. He wrote a treatise in which he imagined the emperor's heir be chosen by ballot of all the existing officials. The choices would be set out by the previous emperor and were to be 5 in number. The least popular choice would be removed in successive ballots until one remained. In this way, the empire would choose its emperor. The mandate of heaven would become the mandate of earth. This radical scheme violated the heavenly supremacy enjoyed by the Son of Heaven, so even Zhuge Liang dared not present it to the emperor without extraordinary flair. For that purpose, he wrote to his cousin Zhuge Xuan in Badong. The message was carried up a long mountain road to a simple wooden temple. There, Zhuge Xuan sighed upon reading the letter. "That little cousin of mine sees everything. I shall have to marry again, no doubt. Well, if this will bring us peace, I shouldn't delay," he thought. He went into the small hut behind the temple complex and handed the letter over to its single resident. A month later, Zhuge Liang invited Liu Bei to his home in the capital for a feast. Curiously, he asked that Guan Yu and Zhang Fei not attend.
"What's the meaning of this?"
Zhang Fei snarled.
"He snubs us so openly now. Elder brother, how can you let him do this?"
"Calm, brother. I expect he means to lecture me and does not wish to bore you with such talk," Liu Bei said.
"I've no particular aversion to it. Allow me to go at least, so that nothing foul can occur," Guan Yu said.
"Foul? Brother, how can you know Master Sleeping Dragon so poorly after all this time? How can I bring an uninvited guest and give baseless suspicion as my reason? If I were visiting a distant acquaintance, I would be mocked by all for such behavior. But visiting a close friend and hero of the realm, this is unthinkable. How dare you suggest such a thing?" Liu Bei dismissed his brothers, and indeed attended the feast with only his personal servants, who waited patiently outside Zhuge Liang's compound. Still, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei were not at all happy, and made their own plans. That evening, Zhuge Liang and Liu Bei were sitting together in a back room, when Zhuge Liang produced a small book. "Your Majesty, this is the last of my wisdom," he said, handing it over. The first page read, "The expression of heaven's mandate, the will of earthly life." "Such a volume! I cannot wait to read it," Liu Bei said. "You should read it at once. I am eager to discuss it with you. But, Prime Minister, forgive me, but you summoned me here saying you had news of Zhuge Liang. How can I commit my mind to this when you leave me awaiting this word? This book is the route through the final gateway to heaven. Complete its study, and Zhuge Liang's Tao will be satisfied. In fact, you'll find that on closer inspection, her precise location is revealed in those very pages." At this, Liu Bei set to quickly reading the tome. Inside, Zhuge Liang's plan for a contest of 5 heirs was detailed, with all manner of stipulations on the best course of action to take upon various disruptions and eventualities. Once he was done reading, Liu Bei was frustrated. "This fantasy! You cannot be advising me to violate the will of heaven! And what clue is this meant to be?" he said. "Your Majesty, I feared you would react this way, and did not want to reveal this work to you. Please forgive me, I never should have divined this offensive wisdom. The expression of heaven's mandate. Are you trying to say this is heaven's will? Heaven would have you be the founder of the everlasting empire. That is your role. The first man who encompassed all things like heaven itself. As your tireless servant, it fell to me to present this to you. Seeing as you are the son of heaven, however, your understanding of these matters must be great. If it seems mistaken to you, how can I ever argue otherwise? Master Sleeping Dragon, I have spoken out of turn. Allow me to think on this further. Of course. I have a certain Xiliang wine here that is said to bring great clarity to one's mind. Even though it is exceedingly rare, I would gladly offer it to you, Your Majesty." Liu Bei accepted, and Zhuge Liang poured out 2 cups from a lavishly decorated bowl. Liu Bei remained buried in the book, reading it all the way through again without even touching the wine. Zhuge Liang, simply watching, left his own wine also. Both cups were nearly cold when Liu Bei finally said, "This final page, it seems like something's missing. It says, 'The one who brings together the realm is the only being the Tao greets by name.' That name. Then it ends. What name is this?" "Your Majesty, your humble nature holds you back at this final moment, but that is only proof of your worth. That name is yours, Your Majesty." Zhuge Liang pulled ink and brush from under the table. "You need only write your name there, and the Tao will be fulfilled. You will have traversed the final gate. Zhuge Liang, she will know if I write here. Of course, you will see her tonight. Don't forget your wine, Your Majesty." Liu Bei grabbed the brush and dipped it in the ink. As soon as he was done drawing out his name, there was a ruckus heard in the next room. Suddenly, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei burst in with struggling women in their arms. Soldiers were grappling with more behind them. The noise was such that little could be said until the fight was over and the women were tied up.
What is the meaning of this, brothers? What sordid thing have you schemed? Liu Bei said. We ask that question of the Prime Minister, Guan Yu barked. These coarse women were hiding in the next room. Since you clearly did not know, there can be no question that he intended you harm. Master, is this true? Zhuge Liang had his eyes closed and his lips tightly shut. He picked up his fan and wafted himself a single time before saying, Lord Zhang, the woman on your right shoulder, please put her down so that she may address the Emperor. You want to let a woman make your excuses for you? Just confess right now and let's be done with this, Zhang Fei said. If you comply, no excuse will be needed. Liu Bei nodded to Zhang Fei and he placed the woman down. She was dressed in rich silks and wore her hair with fine golden pins of the imperial household. In the dim light, it took a long time for Liu Bei to recognize her, especially as this was his first time seeing her without her homemade armor. Queen Zheng, he said, bowing deeply. The queen returned the gesture. I have longed to meet with you again ever since the war. Could it be that you have come to complete the formation of the Eternal Empire? Glancing to Zhuge Liang, Zheng Jiang said, Yes, Your Majesty. I did not mean for our reunion to be under these circumstances, but it seems your younger brothers have been up to no good. Brothers, what do you have to say for yourselves? Liu Bei said. We were sure that Zhuge Liang was up to something. Don't tell me his scheme was all just some stupid matchmaking, Zhang Fei said. Elder brother, we must apologize. We and our soldiers have acted unforgivably. Even though it is late, please consider what our punishment should be at once, Guan Yu said. Brothers, you meant well, Liu Bei said. Everyone, please sit. You must have some of the Prime Minister's rare wine. Let's begin our reunion again after we've all had a cup. Zhuge Liang kept his eyes closed and fanned his face continually as everyone sat down. The servants came in to hand out cups, but Zhuge Liang stopped one and whispered into his ear. Seeing this, Zhang Fei suddenly stood up. He claims he's not up to anything, but look at how he whispers to his servant. He's going to have the wine poisoned, he said. Zhuge Liang chuckled. Lord Zhang, since you noticed, I will tell you. Seeing these heroes assembled here, I couldn't help but feel that the absence of Lord Zhao Yun is worthy of scorn. Therefore, I wanted to surprise you all by secretly summoning him here, but it seems nothing gets past you, Lord Zhang. Delighted with this answer, Liu Bei proposed a toast. Zhuge Liang personally poured the wine to each guest, but while pouring for Zheng Jiang, he said to her, Lady Zheng, after your time in Xiliang, you must be familiar with this sort of wine. Don't let that fool you into drinking too much. Zheng Jiang eyed the cup, her makeup hiding how Zhuge Liang's words had altered her countenance. Queen Zheng, how did you come to be here? Liu Bei asked. I heard that you have become a great man, Your Majesty. Seeing as my husband is a useless incense seller and my fortunes as a woman have fallen so low, I begged the Prime Minister to let me see you again for old time's sake. Now that I have done so, I care not if I live or die, for I am without regret. My lady, you are truly as free as the wind and as strong as the mountain. I beg you live on, for my sake. If that is the Emperor's wish, how can I disobey? If it pleases you, I will happily stay in the palace. That would please me more than anything. It is in line with the Tao, is it not? She said, glancing at Zhuge Liang again. The Prime Minister was still fanning his face, far more rapidly than the cool night justified. This talk might be better suited once we're done with the wine, Guan Yu suggested. Wait a minute, Zhang Fei said. He pointed at Zhuge Liang. The Prime Minister's face is completely pale, but he fans himself like it's the middle of summer. He must be secretly trying to fan his cup to cool it down. Could it be that his poison only takes effect when the brew is warm? Lord Zhang, you embody the tiger in strength and in vigilance, Zhuge Liang said. He stopped fanning and looked down to see that, beside his cup, the ink on the final page of the tome was no longer shining in the candlelight. He placed the fan down and picked up the cup. If you suspect the wine is poisoned, allow me to drink first. Did I not pour all these cups from the same bowl? Let us see if I perish. Without hesitation, he downed the whole cup in one go.
Zheng Jiang gasped, drawing a sneer from Zhang Fei.
So the bookworm can drink? If you're that easily impressed, this palace will be too much for you, bandit, he said.
Brother, how dare you say that? Liu Bei began, but he was cut off by Zhuge Liang spluttering and choking. He started flailing around, and in doing so, he picked up the book beside him and launched it into the air. It fell beside Liu Bei, but the emperor paid it no heed and rushed over to Zhuge Liang. However, the choking turned into a laugh, and Zhuge Liang said, "My apologies, Prime Minister. It seems I have fooled you all. I could not resist. Please, let us hear your toast, and drink this exquisite wine like civilized people." Now everyone else started laughing at Zhuge Liang's utterly convincing act. Zheng Jiang made a point of laughing so heartily that the cup in her hand swung around and had most of its contents spilled all about her. Liu Bei returned to his seat, raised his cup, and toasted, "To the Eternal Empire!" The cheer was replied, and all drank.
"Marvellous," Guan Yu commented. "Bring out more."
Servants appeared with more wine and began bringing in food. Zhuge Liang was still chuckling away, apparently at his own little ruse. Tears were appearing in his eyes, giving a truly merry impression. But strangely, they did not stop flowing as he wiped them away. "I always said I would save the Empire. I always said it," he said, looking up at the ceiling. "To end corruption, to end corruption, down to the very last evil man. Could we have peace any other way? What great misfortune could the likes of me bring upon this world? Heaven's will is truly as complete as the sky and as deep as the ocean."
"What is he blathering about? Drunk already?"
Zhang Fei asked. Guan Yu shrugged. Liu Bei picked up the tome from the floor in front of him. Zheng Jiang kept her head down and stared at her cup, breathing shortly and sharply. "Brothers, these pages here, this wisdom, this is what will end the cycle of death that nearly destroyed the Empire," Liu Bei explained. He was about to pass it over to Guan Yu, but Zhuge Liang suddenly stood, performed a shaky bow, and collapsed over forwards before he could straighten up again.
"It's not funny if you just do it again," Zhang Fei said.
The servants in the wings seemed concerned, but were unsure whether to enter. When Zhuge Liang did not move at all, no one knew what to say. Now Zheng Jiang began to cry, placing her hand on her stomach. Guan Yu suddenly let out a great roar, writhed and tried to stand, but in doing so just stumbled backwards into the wall. He slammed into the floor, blood leaking from his mouth, and shook for a few moments. "Brother!" Liu Bei screamed. The servants all rushed in now, just in time to catch Liu Bei as he fell, his shaking hands gripping the book violently.
"This is your doing! Traitor!"
Zhang Fei screamed at Zheng Jiang, but his movement faltered as he stood. He coughed out some blood.
"You should have known it would take more than that to kill a legendary drinker like me," he said with a smile.
He set upon Zheng Jiang's neck with his hands.
"You idiot! You think it was me! You really are as dumb as a tiger!"
she said, smashing her forehead into Zhang Fei's face. Dazed, he toppled over backwards, but rolled out and was up on his feet again with a roar. Zheng Jiang dashed to Zhuge Liang's seat, where a gilded short sword lay beneath the pillow. Zhang Fei snatched a spear from one of the soldiers flooding in, and charged Zheng Jiang with a battle cry heard across the city. In her formal dress, Zheng Jiang could not dodge away. The spear ran her through, but as if nothing had happened, she sliced the shaft in two and leapt upon Zhang Fei, biting and soaring back and forth with her sword edge. Roaring and spluttering, Zhang Fei was felled. Blood poured from Zheng Jiang's front and back. Letting out a cry, she grabbed the bowl of Xiliang wine and clutched it to her chest in her last moments of consciousness. The servants and soldiers were begging the deceased to wake up and wailing out in panic. Just as things began to quieten down, Zhao Yun stormed into the hall with a sword in each hand. Viewing the scene, he fell to his knees. My lord, I'm so sorry, we were too late," a servant said, prostrating himself on the ground.
"What happened?"
Zhao Yun asked. "It must have been poison. Who could have done this?" the servant said. Zhao Yun looked over and saw Zheng Jiang lying beside Zhang Fei with the wine bowl in her hands. He strode over and snatched it up. Inside were purple drops, indistinguishable from the blood covering the floor in the poor light, but the taste was certain: Xiliang wine, precisely the sort of wine that the bandit queen herself had boasted of drinking at feasts past.
Accursed rogue! You have destroyed the balance of heaven and earth with your facile crimes!
My lord, wait. Lady Zheng was the master's esteemed guest. She drank the wine also. Could she really have poisoned it? A servant asked. Zhao Yun listened to the servant's report on earlier events, then spat on Zheng Jiang's body.
So that's how it was! She had Zhuge Liang arrange her a private meeting with the Emperor, knowing he could not refuse. But Lords Guan and Zhang showed up unexpectedly, and since she couldn't get our lord alone, she was forced to drink her own poison just to get our lord to drink it also. Of course, someone so callous as to do this to the realm wouldn't care for their own sacred life either. There is no act we can perform on this useless corpse that will sufficiently show our contempt.
The thought of funerals turned Zhao Yun's attention back to Liu Bei. He knelt beside his lord and wept freely. Seeing this, all present wept also, and as word carried out of the palace, down the streets, across the bridges, between the post stations, through gates and valleys, and across deserts and seas, all who heard it wept their share. When Zhao Yun finally tried to move the body onto a stretcher, he saw the book clutched in the emperor's hands. He slid it out and opened the cover. He saw Liu Bei's name written in large characters, upside down.
He signed this book. What could it be? He said.
Turning it over to read the first page, he gasped.
The expression of heaven's mandate, the will of earthly life. It's the Emperor's will. His last words. Did he predict this? Indeed, only the Son of Heaven can know when one's allotted time is over.
Quickly standing, Zhao Yun held up the tome and said,
I swear that I, Zhao Yun of Changshan, will uphold the final commands of Emperor Dongfeng, my closest friend, and that I will stake my life against any who dare get in my way.
Zhao Yun would uphold his oath until the day he died. He was remembered in later times by the lines, with spear singing of the Tao, with sword howling for eternity, the white dragon rider emptied the old and dusty halls. No longer did they plead without their unfilial blood. 4 emperors were selected and removed in 20 years. Their names were Liu Cong, son of the late Liu Biao, Sun Quan, brother of Zhao Yun's first victim, Liu Qing, a lowly man claiming Liu heritage who became unusually popular, and Cao Ang, son of the legendary Southlands official Cao Cao. Then, Empress Zhuge Liang, daughter of Zhuge Liang, secured the throne for her lifetime. By that period, the station of emperor was not so important as all those thousands of stations below, who handled their own affairs and lamented their own tumult as villains and heroes stirred their ranks. Some vestige of the civil war lived on in the chaos of political life under Zhuge Liang's competitive system. Yet when threats beyond the empire emerged, they were able to unify and work as one. In this way, it is said that the cycle that had shattered the empire time and time again had truly been broken. Indeed, the empire was at once shattered and unified, at once eternally at peace and eternally battling. Like a cartwheel mired in the mud, the rise and fall of dynasties was halted. Liu Bei, for his founding role in this, was given the highest possible honours. He was the man who gave the mandate of heaven to the empire itself, and thus proved to the world the right of the Chinese to rule the mountains, plains and oceans in all directions, a right they enforced without hesitation. That which was written of Liu Bei's life in the centuries after his death dwarfs the detail and heroism portrayed in this volume. Strangely though, little is said of the respected diplomat Zhuge Liang. In a mess of conflicting stories created in attempts to unseat Zhuge Liang, the true nature of Zhuge Liang's contribution was lost to history. Indeed, the entire reason for the reformation of the empire was forgotten with time. So it came to be that when people stated the adage that the empire is eternal, they never stopped to think why that was. Such was the bridge to the upheaval that would later dwarf the events of Liu Bei's wars. While so much knowledge was lost in that era, the tale of the heroes who ended the villainy of pretenders, warlords and kings was not permitted to be forgotten. Thus, the empire, forever divided, forever united, survived, dormant in dreams, awaiting the return of the Eastern Wind. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of Honor Among Kings. I didn't really know what I was doing the whole time writing this, but I wanted to write something that evoked similar vibes to the book the game is based on, and hopefully that worked out. And hopefully you liked my invented ending to replace the pretty much nothing that happened in the final few hours of the campaign. If you made it this far and haven't done so already, check out my channel for similar things tucked away here and there. Massive thanks as always to all patrons who supported the channel throughout the creation of this series. The script is about the length of a short novel, and if I have the time at some point I'll edit it together into an ebook format. That's all for this series, thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.